Hello, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, boils and ghouls, and to those who are undecided. Those of every sort of rainbow of the spectrum. No, I'm not going to plug that in. I should. I should plug that in. 1 second, my loves, and then I will share. 1 second. Okay, let me just go right over here to the Book of Faces, and we'll share that we are live. Let's see. Here we go. And I hope we're on part 3. I really didn't have much of an opportunity to look. So we're going to go over here. Story time. And we'll paste it here. And let it do its little circle thing. And we post that. And then we go right over to the other one. Once that is up and live, then we go right over here. And we will share that with the other page. Share. Share to your page. Nope. Share to your where did I? Oh, there we go. Okay. And hello, Richard Goulet. Hello, Psychic Godfather. How's my friend? Good to see you. Hi, Amy. Good to see you too. Lovely to see you all. I'm doing all right. I'm doing quite well. Okay, let me make certain that went through. That went through. Good. Okay. So hello, everybody. Oh, I'm going to turn that down just a touch, just a little bit. I feel like it's a little. I didn't have much time to set up. Hi, Mary Jane. Good evening. How are you? Good to have you. Good, Psychic Godfather. My friend, ladies and gentlemen, Psychic Godfather, brilliant, a brilliant psychic, clairvoyant, a man with a real good heart. Love this man. Vinny the Weasel, hello. Good evening. Good wherever you are. It might be morning. Who knows? But hello and welcome. I am really excited to be reading this book to you. And I want to talk a little bit, before we do, I want to talk a little bit of announcements, a little bit of what's going on. So I had my first Facebook ban, I think in, oh goodness, I think I may have only been temporarily blocked for an hour long time ago. And then I had my Facebook ban because I defended a trans woman, and this fellow decided that I was bullying him for standing up for the trans woman. Anyway, so that does happen. It's a modern day world, I think. Also, I want to talk a little bit about. Oh, thank you, Psychic Godfather. I appreciate that. I want to talk a little bit about. Where was I going? Oh, yes. There. I always like when people decide they want to spread their faith with me, and that's fine. But I always like when people are honest. I will be polite and sweet when people answer as honestly as they can. I try to be as honest as I can be, and so I like it when others are honest. If someone is dishonest, then that's when the refined, polite gentleman that you love and know becomes a, well, I began to swear like a sailor, I'm afraid. But anyway, enough about that. What else is happening? Well, we are now in springtime, so that is a wonderful thing. Welcome to spring. Spring has sprung. White Rabbit, hello. Thank you, Vinny the Weasel. I appreciate that. I'm going to let the clock do its little thing. I know it's just about a minute or so behind what the actual time is, but that is what happens when you have an older clock. Sometimes it happens. Kat Calavara, hello and welcome. Okay, my lovelies. We are continuing to read on We Have Always Lived at the Castle. And we left off, if memory serves, with the cousin has come to town, and our dear hero Mercat is not too fond of him, who also, it should be noted, he resembles their father, even though he's their cousin. but I'm not here to judge. Anyway, without further ado, let us read chapter 7. Thursday was my most powerful day. It was the right day to settle up with Charles. In the morning, Constance decided to make spice cookies for dinner. That was too bad, because if any of us had known, we could have told her not to bother, that Thursday was going to be the last day. Even Uncle Julian did not suspect, however. He felt a little stronger on Thursday morning, and late in the morning Constance brought him into the kitchen, which smelled richly of spiced cookies, and continued putting his papers in his box. Charles had taken a hammer and found nails and a board, and was pounding away mercilessly at the broken step. From the kitchen window, I could see that he was doing it very badly, and I was pleased. I wished the hammer to pound his thumb. I stayed in the kitchen until I was certain that they would all keep where they were for a while, and then I went upstairs and into our father's room, walking softly so Constance would not know I was there. The first thing to do was to stop our father's watch, which Charles had started. I knew he was not wearing it to mend the broken step because he was not wearing the chain. And I found the watch and the chain and our father's signet ring on our father's dresser, with Charles' tobacco pouch and 4 books of matches. I was not allowed to touch matches, but in any case, I would not have touched Charles' matches. I took up the watch, and I listened to it ticking because Charles had started it. I could not turn it all the way back to where it had formerly been because he had kept it going for 2 or 3 days, but I twisted the winding knob backward until there was a small complaining crack from the watch, and the ticking stopped. When I was sure that he could never start it again, I put it back gently where I had found it. One thing at least had been released from Charles' spell, and I thought that I had at last broken through his tight skin of invulnerability. I need not bother about the chain, which was broken, and I disliked the ring. Eliminating Charles from everything he had touched was almost impossible, but it seemed to me that if I altered our father's room, and perhaps later the kitchen and the drawing room and the study, and even finally the garden, Charles would be lost, shut off from what he recognized, and would have to concede that this was not his house. He had come to visit, and so he would have to go away. I altered our father's room very quickly and almost without noise. During the night, I had gone out in the darkness and brought in a large basket filled with pieces of wood and broken sticks and leaves and scraps of glass and metal from a field and the wood. Jonas came back and forth with me, amused at our walking silently while everyone slept. When I altered our father's room, I took the books from the desk and the blankets from the bed, and I put my glass and metal and wood and sticks and leaves into the empty places. I could not put the things which had been our father's into my own room, so I carried them softly up the stairs to the attic, where everything else of theirs was kept. I poured a pitcher of water onto our father's bed. Charles could not sleep there again. The mirror over the dresser was already smashed. It would not reflect Charles. He would not be able to find books or clothes, and would be lost in a room of leaves and broken sticks. I tore down the curtains and threw them on the floor now. Charles would have to look outside and see the driveway going away and the road beyond. I looked at the room with pleasure. A demon ghost would not easily find himself there. I was back in my own room, lying on my bed and playing with Jonas, when I heard Charles down below in the garden shouting to Constance. "This is too much," he was saying. "Simply too much." "What now?" Constance asked. She had come to the kitchen door, and I could hear Uncle Julian somewhere below saying, "Tell that young fool to stop his bellowing." I looked out quickly. The broken step had clearly been too much for Charles, because the hammer and the board lay on the ground, and the step was still broken. Charles was coming up from the path, from the creek, and he was carrying something. I wondered what he had found now. "Did you ever hear anything like this?" he was saying, even though he was close now, he was still shouting, "Look at this, Connie! Just look at this!" "I suppose it belongs to Merricat," Constance said. "It does not belong to Merricat or anything like it. This is money." "Yes, I remember," Constance said. "Silver dollars. I remember when she buried them." "There must be $20 or $30 here. This is outrageous. She likes to bury things." Charles was still shouting, shaking my box of silver dollars back and forth violently. I wondered if he would drop it. It would I would like to have seen Charles on the ground, scrabbling after my silver dollars. "It's not her money," he was shouting. "She has no right to hide it." I wondered how he had happened to find the box where I had buried it. Perhaps Charles and money found each other, no matter how far apart they were. Or perhaps Charles was engaged in systemically digging up every inch of our land. "This is terrible," he was shouting. "Terrible! She has no right." "No harm is done," Constance said. I could see that she was puzzled, and somewhere inside the kitchen, Uncle Julian was pounding and calling her. "How do you know there isn't more?" Charles held the box out accusingly. "How do you know that crazy kid hasn't buried thousands of dollars all over, where we'll never find it?" "She likes to bury things," Constance said. "Coming, Uncle Julian." Charles followed her inside, still holding the box tenderly. I supposed I could bury the box again after he had gone, but I was not pleased. I came to the top of the stairs and watched Charles proceeding down the hall to the study. He was clearly going to put my silver dollars into our father's safe. I ran down the stairs quickly and quietly and out through the kitchen. "Silly Merricat," Constance said to me as I passed. She was putting spice cookies in long rows to cool. I was thinking of Charles. I could turn him into a fly and drop him into a spider's web and watch him tangled and helpless and struggling, shut into the body of a dying, buzzing fly. I could wish him dead until he died. I could fasten him to a tree and keep him there until he grew into the trunk and bark grew over his mouth. I could bury him in the hole where my box of silver dollars had been, so safe until he came. If he was under the ground, I could walk over him, stamping my feet. He had not even bothered to fill in the hole. I could imagine him walking here and noticing the spot where the ground was disturbed, stopping to poke in it, and then digging wildly with both his hands, scowling, and finally greedy and shocked and gasping when he found my box of silver dollars. "Don't blame me," I said to the hole. I would have to find something else to bury here, and I wished it would be Charles. The hole would hold his head nicely. I laughed when I found a round stone the right size and scratched a face on it and buried it in the hole. "Goodbye, Charles," I said. "Next time, don't go around taking other people's things." I stayed by the creek for an hour or so. I was staying by the creek when Charles finally went upstairs and into the room which was no longer his and no longer our father's. I thought for 1 minute that Charles had been in my shelter, but nothing was disturbed, as it would have been if Charles had come scratching round. He had been near enough to bother me, however, so I cleared out the grass and leaves I usually slept on, and shook out my blanket, and put in everything fresh. I washed the flat rocks where I sometimes ate my meals, and put a better branch across the entrance. I wondered if Charles would come back looking for more silver dollars, and I wondered if he would like my 6 blue marbles. I was finally hungry and went back to our house, and there in the kitchen was Charles, still shouting. "I can't believe it," he was saying, quite shrill by now. I just can't believe it." I wondered how long Charles was going to go on shouting. He made a black noise in our house, and his voice was getting thinner and higher. Perhaps if he shouted long enough, he would squeak. I sat on the kitchen step next to Jonas and thought that perhaps Constance might laugh out loud if Charles squeaked at her. It never happened, however, because as soon as he saw that I was sitting on the step, he was quiet for a minute, and then, when he spoke, he had brought his voice down and made it slow. "So you're back," he said. He did not move toward me, but I felt his voice as though he were coming closer. I did not look at him. I looked at Jonas, who was looking at him. I haven't quite decided what I'm going to do with you, he said, but whatever I do, you're going to remember it. Don't bully her, Charles, Constance said. I did not like her voice either because it was strange, and I knew she was uncertain. It's all my fault anyway. That was her new way of thinking. I thought I would help Constance, perhaps make her laugh. Amanita pantherina, I said. Highly poisonous. Amanita rubescens, edible and good. The Sueda malcuta is water hemlock, one of the most poisonous of the wild plants, if taken internally. The Apocnium cannabinium is not a poisonous plant of the first importance, but the snakeberry. Stop it, Charles said, still quiet. Constance, I said. We came home for lunch, Jonas and I. First, you will have to explain to Cousin Charles, Constance said, and I was chilled. Charles was sitting at the kitchen table, with his chair pushed back and turned a little to face me in the doorway. Constance stood behind him, leaning against the sink. Uncle Julian sat at the table, stirring papers. Then were rows and rows of spice cookies cooling in the kitchen, still smelled of cinnamon and nutmeg. I wondered if Constance would give Jonas a spiced cookie with his supper, but of course she never did because that was the last day. Now listen, Charles said. He had brought down a handful of sticks and dirt, perhaps to prove to Constance that they had been really in his room. Or perhaps because he was going to clean it away handful by handful. The sticks and dirt looked wrong on the kitchen table, and I thought that perhaps one reason Constance looked so sad was the dirt on her clean table. Now you listen, Charles said. I cannot work in here with that young man if is going to talk all the time, Uncle Julian said. Constance, tell him he must be quiet for a little while. You too, Charles said in that soft voice. I have put up with enough from both of you. One of you fools fouls my room and goes around burying money, and the other one can't even remember my name. Charles, I said to Jonas. I was the one who buried the money, certainly, so I was not the one who could not remember his name. Poor old Uncle Julian could not bury anything and could not remember Charles' name. I would remember to be kind to Uncle Julian. Will you give Uncle Julian a spice cookie for his dinner? I asked Constance. And Jonas one too? Mary Catherine, Charles said, I'm going to give you one chance to explain. Why did you make that mess in my room? There was no reason to answer him. He was not Constance, and anything I said to him might perhaps help him get back his thin grasp on our house. I sat on the doorstep and played with Jonas's ears, which flicked and snapped when I tickled them. Answer me, Charles said. How often must I tell you, John, that I know nothing whatsoever about it? Uncle Julian slammed his hand down onto the papers and scattered them. It is the quarrel between the women and none of my affair. I do not involve myself in my wife's petty squabbles, and I strongly advise you to do the same. It is not fitting for men of dignity to threaten and reproach because women have had a falling out. You lose stature, John. You lose stature. Shut up, Charles said. He was shouting again, and I was pleased. Constance, he said, lowering his voice a little, this is terrible. The sooner you're out of it, the better. Will not be told to shut up by my own brother. We will leave your house, John, if that is really your desire. I ask you, however, to reflect. My wife and I... It's my fault. All of it, Constance said. I thought she was going to cry. It was unthinkable for Constance to cry again after all these years, but I was held tight, I was chilled, and I could not move to go over to her. You are evil, I said to Charles. You are a ghost and a demon. What the hell? Charles said. Don't pay any attention, Constance told him. Don't listen to Merricat's nonsense. You're a very selfish man, John, perhaps even a scoundrel, and overly fond of world's goods. I sometimes wonder, John, if you are every bit the gentleman. This is a crazy house, Charles said with conviction. Constance, this is a crazy house. I'll clean your room right away, Charles. Please don't be angry." Constance looked at me wildly, but I was held tight and could not see her. Uncle Julian, Uncle Julian. Charles got up and went over to where Uncle Julian sat at the table. "Don't you touch my papers," Uncle Julian said, trying to cover them with his hands. You get away from my papers, you bastard." "What?" said Charles. I apologize," Uncle Julian said to Constance. "Not language for your ears, my dear. Just tell this young bastard to stay away from my papers." "Now you look here," Charles said to Uncle Julian. "I tell you, I've had enough of this. I'm not going to touch your silly papers, and I am not your brother John." "Of course you're not my brother John. You are not tall enough by half an inch. You are a young bastard, and I desire that you return to your father, who, to my shame, is also my brother Arthur, and tell him I said so. In the presence of your mother, if you choose. She's a strong-willed woman, but lacks family feeling. She desired that the family connection be severed. I have consequently no objection to your repeating my high language in her presence." "That's all been forgotten, Uncle Julian. Constance and I think you have forgotten yourself, young man, to take such a tone with me. I am pleased you are repentant, but you have taken far too much of my time. Please be extremely quiet now. Not until I have finished with your niece, Mary Catherine." "My niece, Mary Catherine, has been a long time dead, young man. She did not survive the loss of her family. I supposed you knew that." "What?" Charles turned furiously to Constance. "My niece, Mary Catherine, died in an orphanage of neglect during her sister's trial for murder. But she has very little consequence to my book, and so we will have done with her. She's sitting right here." Charles waved his hands, and his face was red. "Young man," Uncle Julian put down his pencil and half turned to face Charles, "I have pointed out to you, I believe, the importance of my work. You chose constantly to interrupt me. I have had enough. You must either be quiet or you must leave this room." I was laughing at Charles, and even Constance was smiling. Charles stood and staring at Uncle Julian, and Uncle Julian, going through his papers, said to himself, "Damned impertinent puppy." And then, "Constance?" "Yes, Uncle Julian." Why have my papers been put into this box? I shall have to take them all out again and rearrange them. Has that young man been near my papers? Has he?" "No, Uncle Julian." "He takes a great deal upon himself, I think. When is he going away?" "I'm not going away," Charles said. "I'm going to stay." "Impossible," Uncle Julian said. We have not the room. Constance?" "Yes, Uncle Julian." "I would like a chop for my lunch. A nice little chop, neatly broiled. Perhaps a mushroom?" "Yes," Constance said with relief. I should start lunch, as though she were happy to be doing it. At last she came to the table to brush away the dirt and leaves that Charles had left there. She brushed them into the paper bag and threw the bag into the wastebasket, and then she came back with a cloth and scrubbed the table. Charles looked at her and at me and at Uncle Julian. He was clearly baffled, unable to grasp his fingers tightly around anything he saw or heard. It was a joyful sight to see the first twistings and turnings of the demon caught. And I was proud of Uncle Julian. Constance smiled down at Charles, happy that no one was shouting any more. She was not going to cry now, and perhaps she too was getting quick glimpse of a straining demon, because she said, "You look tired, Charles. Go and rest till lunch." "Go and rest where?" he said, and he was still angry. "I'm not going to stir out there until something is done about that girl." "Maricat? Why should anything be done?" I said. "I would clean your room. I said I would clean your room." "Aren't you even going to punish her?" "Punish me?" I was standing then, shivering against the doorframe. "Punish me? You mean send me to bed without my dinner?" And I ran. I ran until I was in the field of grass, in the very center where it was safe, and I sat there, the grass taller than my head and hiding me. Jonas found me, and we sat there together where no one could ever see us. After a very long time, I stood up again because I knew where I was going. I was going to the summer house. I had not been near the summer house for 6 years, but Charles had blackened the world, and only the summer house would do. Jonas would not follow me. He disliked the summer house, and when he saw me turning onto the overgrown path which led there, he went another way as though he had something important to do and would meet me somewhere later. No one had ever liked the summer house very much. I remembered. Our father had planned it and intended to lead the creek near it and build a tiny waterfall, but something had gotten into the wood and stone and paint when the summer house was built and made it bad. Our mother had once seen a rat in the doorway looking in, and nothing after that could persuade her there again, and where our mother did not go, no one else went. I had never buried anything around here. The ground was black and wet, and nothing buried would have been quite comfortable. The trees pressed too closely against the sides of the summer house and breathed heavily on its roof, and the poor flowers planted here once had either died or grown into huge, tasteless wild things. When I stood near the summer house and looked at it, I thought it the ugliest place I'd ever seen. I remembered that our mother had quite seriously asked to have it burned down. Inside was all wet and dark. I disliked sitting on the stone floor, but there was no other place. Once I recalled there had been chairs here, and perhaps even now a low table, but these were gone now, carried off or rotted away. I sat on the floor and placed all of them correctly in my mind, in the circle around the dining room table. Our father sat at the head. Our mother sat at the foot. Uncle Julian sat on the hand of our mother, and our brother Thomas on the other side. Beside my father sat our Aunt Dorothy and Constance. I sat between Constance and Uncle Julian in my rightful, my own and proper place at the table. Slowly, I began to listen to them talking. To buy a book for Mary Catherine, Lucy should not Mary Catherine have a new book? Mary Catherine should have anything she wants, my dear. Our most loved daughter must have anything she likes. Constance, your sister, lacks butter. Pass it to her at once, please. Mary Catherine, we love you. You must never be punished, Lucy. You are to see it to it that our most loved daughter, Mary Catherine, is never punished. Mary Catherine would never allow herself to do anything wrong. There is never any need to punish her. I have heard, Lucy, of the disobedient children being sent to their beds without dinner as punishment. This must not be permitted with our Mary Catherine. Oh, I quite agree, my dear. Mary Catherine must never be punished, must never be sent to bed without dinner. Mary Catherine will never allow herself to do anything inviting punishment. Our beloved, our dearest Mary Catherine must be guarded and cherished. Thomas, give your sister your dinner. She would like more to eat. Dorothy, Julian, rise when our beloved daughter rises. Bow all your heads to our adored Mary Catherine. Chapter 8. Chapter 8. I had to go back for dinner. It was vital that I sat at the dinner table with Constance and Uncle Julian and Charles. It was unthinkable that they should sit there eating their dinner and talking and passing food to one another and see my place empty. As Jonas and I came along the path and through the garden in the gathering darkness, I looked at the house with all the richness of love I contained. It was a good house, and soon it would be cleaned and fair again. I stopped for a minute, looking at Jonas brush my leg and spoke softly in curiosity. Jonas, I'm looking at our house, I told him, and he stood quietly beside me, looking up with me. The roof pointed firmly against the sky. The walls met one another compactly, and the windows shone darkly. It was a good house, and nearly clean. There was light from the kitchen window, and from the windows of the dining room. It was time for their dinner, and I must be there. I wanted to be inside the house, with the door shut behind me. When I opened the kitchen door to go inside, I could feel at once the house still held anger, and I wondered that anyone could keep one emotion so long. I could hear his voice clearly from the kitchen, going on and on and on. Must be done about her, he was saying. Things simply cannot continue like this. Poor Constance, I thought, having to listen and to watch the food getting cold. Jonas ran ahead of me into the dining room, and Constance said, "Here she is." I stood in the dining room doorway and looked carefully for a minute. Constance was wearing pink, and her hair was combed back nicely. She smiled at me when I looked at her, and I knew she was tired of listening. Uncle Julian's wheelchair was pushed up tight against the table, and I was sorry to see that Constance had tucked his napkin under his chin. It was too bad that Uncle Julian should not be allowed to eat freely. He was eating meatloaf and peas, which Constance had preserved once, one fragrant summer day. Constance had cut the meatloaf into small pieces, and Uncle Julian mashed meatloaf and peas with the back of his spoon and stirred them before trying to get them into his mouth. He was not listening, but the voice went on and on. "So you decided to come back, did you? And a high time, too, young lady. Your sister and I have been trying to decide how to teach you a lesson." "Wash your face, Merricat," Constance said gently, "and comb your hair. We do not want you untidy at the table, and your cousin Charles is already angry with you." Charles pointed his fork at me. "I may as well tell you, Mary, that your tricks are over for good. Your sister and I have decided that we have had just exactly enough of hiding and destroying and temper." I disliked having a fork pointed at me, and I disliked the sound of the voice never stopping. I wished he would put the fork on the table into his mouth and strangle himself. "Run along, Merricat," Constance said. "Your dinner will be cold." She knew I would not eat dinner sitting at the table, and she would bring me my dinner in the kitchen afterwards. But I thought that she did not want to remind Charles of that, and so give him one more thing to talk about. I smiled at her, and so into the hall, with the voice still talking behind me. There had not been this many words sounded in our house for a long time, and it was going to take a while to clean them out. I walked heavily going up the stairs so they could hear that I was surely going up. And when I reached the top, I went softly as Jonas behind me. Constance had cleaned the room where he was living. It looked very empty, because all she had done was take the things out and had nothing to put back because I had carried all of it to the attic. I knew the dresser drawers were empty, and the closet and the bookshelves. There was no mirror, and a broken watch and a smashed chain lay alone on the dresser top. Constance had taken away the wet bedding, and I supposed she had dried and turned the mattress, because the bed was made up again. The long curtains were gone, perhaps to be washed. He had been lying on the bed because it was disarranged, and his pipe, still burning, lay on the table beside the bed. I supposed that he'd been lying here when Constance called him to dinner, and I wondered if he had looked around and around the altered room, trying to find something familiar, hoping that perhaps the angle of the closet door or the light in the ceiling would bring everything back to him again. I was sorry that Constance had to turn the mattress alone. Usually I helped her, but perhaps he had come and offered to do it for her. She had even brought him a clean saucer for his pipe. Our house did not have ashtrays, and when he kept trying to find places to put down his pipe, Constance had brought a set of chipped saucers from the pantry shelf and given them to him to hold his pipe. The saucers were pink with gold leaves around the rim. They were from a set older than any I remembered. "Who used them?" I asked Constance when she brought them into the kitchen. "Where are their cups?" "I've never seen them used. They come from the time before I was in the kitchen. Some great-great-grandmother brought them with her dowry, and they were used and broken and replaced and finally put away on the top shelf of the pantry. There are only these saucers and 3 dinner plates." "They belong in the pantry," I said. not put around the house. Constance had given them to Charles, and now they were scattered, instead of spending their little time decently put away on a shelf. There was one in the drawing room, and one in the dining room, and one, I supposed, in the study. They were not fragile, because the one now in the bedroom had not cracked, although the pipe on it was still burning. I had known all day that I would find something here. I brushed the saucer and the pipe off the table into the wastebasket, and they fell softly onto the newspapers he had brought into the house. I was wondering about my eyes. One of my eyes, the left eye, saw everything golden and yellow and orange, and the other eye saw shades of blue and grey and green. Perhaps one eye was for daylight and the other was for night. If everyone in the world saw different colors from different eyes, there might be a great many new colors still to be invented. I had reached the staircase to go downstairs before I remembered I had to go back to wash and comb my hair. What took you so long? He asked. What took you so long? He asked, when I sat down at the table. What have you been doing up there? Will you make me cake with pink frosting? I asked Constance, with little gold leaves around the edges. Jonas and I are going to have a party. Perhaps tomorrow, Constance said. We are going to have a long talk after dinner, Charles said. Solanum dulcamara, I told him. What? He asked. Deadly nightshade, Constance said. Charles, please let it wait. I've had enough, he said. Constance? Yes, Uncle Julian. I've cleaned my plate. Uncle Julian found a morsel of meatloaf on his napkin and put it into his mouth. What do I have now? Perhaps a little more, Uncle Julian. It is the pleasure to see you so hungry. I feel considerably better tonight. I have not felt so hearty for days. I was pleased that Uncle Julian was well, and I knew he was happy because he had been so discourteous to Charles. While Constance was cutting up another small piece of meatloaf, Uncle Julian looked at Charles with an evil shine in his old eyes, and I knew he was going to say something wicked. Young man, he began at last, but Charles turned his head suddenly to look into the hall. I smell smoke, Charles said. Constance paused, lifted her head, and turned to the kitchen door. The stove, she said, and got up and quickly ran into the kitchen. Young man? No, there's certainly smoke. Charles went to look into the hall. I smell it out here, he said. I wondered who he thought he was talking to. Constance was in the kitchen, and Uncle Julian was thinking about what he was going to say, and I had stopped listening. There is smoke, Charles said. It's not the stove. Constance stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at Charles. Charles turned and came closer to me. If this is anything you've done, he said. I laughed, because it was clear that Charles was afraid to go upstairs and follow the smoke. Then Constance said, Charles, your pipe. And he turned and ran up the stairs. I've asked him, Constance said. Would it start a fire? I asked her. And then Charles screamed from upstairs, screamed, I thought, with the exact sound of a blue jay in the woods. That's Charles, I said politely to Constance, and she hurried to go into the hall and look up. What is it? She asked. Charles, what is it? Fire, Charles said, crashing down the stairs. Run, run, the whole damned house is on fire. He screamed into Constance's face. And you haven't got a phone. My papers, Uncle Julian said. I have to collect my papers and remove them to a place of safety. He pushed against the edge of the table to move his chair away. Constance, run, Charles said to the front door now, wrenching it at the lock. Run, you damned fool. I have not done so much running in the past few years, young man. I see no cause for this hysteria. There is time to gather my papers. Charles had the front door open now and turned on the doorsill to call Constance. Don't try to carry the safe, he said. Put the money in a bag. I'll be back as fast as I can to get help. Don't panic. He ran, and we could hear him screaming, Fire, 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 as he ran toward the village. Good heavens, Constance said, almost amused. Then she took Uncle Julian's chair to help him into his room, and I went into the hall and looked upstairs. Charles had left the door to our father's room standing open, and I could see the movement of fire inside. Fire burns upward, I thought. It will burn their things in the attic. Charles had left the front door open too, and a line of smoke reached down the stairs and drifted outside. I did not see any need to move quickly or to run shrieking around the house, because the fire did not seem to be hurrying itself. I wondered if I could go upstairs and shut the door to our father's room and keep the fire inside, belonging entirely to Charles, but when I started up the stairs, I saw a finger of flame reach out and touch the hall carpet, and some heavy object fell crashing in our father's room. There would be nothing of Charles in there now. Even his pipe must have been consumed. Uncle Julian is gathering his papers, Constance said, coming into the hall and standing beside me. She had Uncle Julian's shawl over her arm. We all have to go outside, I said. I knew that she was frightened, so I said, we can stay on the porch behind the vines in the darkness. We neatened it just the other day, she said. It has no right to burn. She began to shiver as though she were angry, and I took her by the hand and brought her through the open front door, and just as we turned back for another look, the lights came into the driveway with disgusting noise of sirens, and we were held in the doorway in the light. Constance put her face against me to hide, and then there was Jim Donnell, the first one to leap from the fire engine and run up the steps. Out of the way, he said, and pushed past us into the house. I took Constance along the porch to the corner where the vines grew thick, and she moved into the corner and pressed against the vines. I held her hand tight, and together we watched the great feet of the men stepping across our doorsill, dragging their hoses, bringing filth and confusion and danger into our house. More lights moved into the driveway and up the steps, and the front of the house was white and pale and uncomfortable at being so clearly visible. It had never been lighted before. The noise was too much for me to hear altogether, but somewhere in the noise was Charles' voice, still going on and on and on. Get the safe! Get the safe! It's in the study! Get the safe! He said it 1,000 times. Smoke squeezed out the front door, coming between the big men pushing in. Constance, I whispered. Constance, don't watch them. Can they see me? She whispered back. Is anyone looking? They're all watching the fire. Be very quiet. I looked carefully out between the vines. There was a long row of cars and the village fire engine, all parked as close to the house as they could get. And everyone in the village was there, looking up and watching. I saw faces, laughing, and faces that looked frightened. And then someone called out very near to us, What about the women and that old man? Anyone see them? They had plenty of warning, Charles shouted somewhere. They're all right. Uncle Julian could manage his chair well enough to get out the back door, I thought, but it did not seem that the fire was going near the kitchen or Uncle Julian's room. I could see the hoses and hear the men shouting, and they were all on the stairs and in the front bedrooms upstairs. I could not get through the front door, and even if I could leave Constance, there was no way to go around the back door without going down the steps in the light with all of them watching. Was Uncle Julian frightened? I whispered to Constance. I think he was annoyed, she said. A few minutes later, she said, It will take a great deal of scrubbing to get that hall clean again, and sighed. I was pleased that she thought of the house and forgot the people outside. Jonas, I said to her, where is he? I could see her smile a little in the darkness of the vines. He was annoyed too, she said. He went out the back door when I took Uncle Julian in to get his papers. We were all right. Uncle Julian might very well forget that there was a fire at all if he became interested in the papers, and Jonas was almost certainly watching from the shadow of the trees. When they had finished putting out Charles's fire, I would take Constance back inside, and we could start to clean our house. Constance was quieter, although more and more cars came down the driveway, and the unending patter of feet went back and forth across our doorsill, except for Jim Donnell, who wore a hat proclaiming him chief. It was impossible to identify any one person any more than it was possible to put a name to any of the faces out in front of our house, looking up and laughing at the fire. I tried to think clearly. The house was burning. There was fire inside our house, but Jim Donnell and the other anonymous men in hats and raincoats were curiously able to destroy the fire which was running through the bones of our house. It was Charles's fire. When I listened, particularly for the fire, I could hear it, a singing, hot noise upstairs, but over and around it, smothering it, were the voices of men inside and the voices of people watching outside and the distant sound of cars in the driveway. Next to me, Constance was standing quietly, often covering her eyes with her hands. She was excited, I thought, but not in any danger. Every now and then, it was possible to hear one voice raised above the others. Jim Donnell shouted some word of instruction, or someone in the crowd called out, "Why not let it burn?" A woman's voice called loudly, laughing, and "Get the safe out of the study downstairs." That was Charles, safely in the crowd out front. "Why not let it burn?" the woman called insistently, and one of the dark men, going in and out of our front door, turned and waved and grinned. "We're the firemen," he called back. "We gotta put it out." "Let it burn," the woman called. Smoke was everywhere, thick and ugly. Sometimes when I looked out, the faces of the people were clouded with smoke, and it came out the front door in frightening waves. Once there was a crash from inside the house, and voices speaking quickly and urgently, and faces outside turned up happily in the smoke, mouths open. "Get the safe," Charles called out wildly. "Two or three of you men, get the safe out of the study. The whole house is going." "Let it burn," the woman called. I was hungry, and I wanted my dinner, and I wondered how long they could make the fire last before they put it out and went away, and Constance and I could go back inside. One or two of the village boys had edged into the porch dangerously close to where we stood, but they only looked inside, not at the porch, and tried to stand on their toes and see past the firemen and the hoses. I was tired, and I wished it would all be over. I realized then that the light was lessening, and the faces on the lawn less distinct, and a new tone came into the noise. The voices inside were surer, less sharp, almost pleased, and the voices outside were lower and disappointed. "It's going out," someone said. "Under control," another voice added. "Did a lot of damage, though," and there was laughter. "Sure made a mess of that old place. Should have burned it down years ago, and them with it." They mean us, I thought, Constance and me. "Say, anybody seen them?" "No such luck. Firemen threw them out." "Too bad." The light was almost gone. The people outside stood now in shadows, their faces narrowed and dark, with only the headlights of the cars to light them. I saw the flash of a smile, and somewhere else a hand raised to wave, and the voice went on regretfully. "Just about over. Pretty good fire." Jim Donnell came through the front door. Everyone knew him because of his size and his hat saying chief. "Say, Jim," someone called. Why don't you let it burn?" He lifted both his hands to make everyone quiet. "Fire's all out, folks," he said. Very carefully, he put his hands up and took off his hat, saying, "Chief." And while everyone watched, he walked slowly down the steps and over the fire engine and set his hat down on the front seat. Then he bent down, searching thoughtfully, and finally, while everyone watched, he took up a rock in complete silence. He turned slowly, then raised his arm and smashed the rock through one of the great tall windows of our mother's drawing room. A wall of laughter rose and grew behind him, and then, first the boys and the steps, and then the other men, and last the women and the smaller children, they moved like a wave at our house. "Constance," I said, "Constance," but she had her hands over her eyes. The other of the drawing room windows crashed, this time from inside, and I saw it had been shattered by a lamp which always stood by Constance's chair in the drawing room. Above it all, most horrible, was the laughter. I saw one of the Dresden figurines thrown and break against the porch rail, and the other fell unbroken and rolled along the grass. I heard Constance's harp go over with a musical cry, and a sound which I knew was a chair being smashed against the wall. "Listen," said Charles from somewhere. Will a couple of you guys help me with this safe? Then, through the laughter, someone began. Mary Cat, said Constance, would you like a cup of tea? It was rhythmic and insistent. I am on the moon, I thought. Please let me be on the moon. Then I heard the sound of dishes smashing, and that minute I realized that we stood outside the tall windows of the dining room, and they were coming very close. Constance, I said, we have to run. She shook her head, her hands over her face. They'll find us in a minute. Please, Constance, dearest, run with me. I can't, she said, and from inside the dining room window a shout went up. Mary Cat, said Constance, would you like to go to sleep? And I pulled Constance away for the second before the and I pulled Constance away a second before a window went. I thought a chair had been thrown through it. Perhaps the dining room chair, where our father used to sit, and Charles used to sit. Hurry, I said, no longer able to be quiet in all that noise, and pulling Constance by the hand, and I ran toward the steps. As we came into the light, she threw Uncle Julian's shawl across her face to hide it. A little girl ran out of the front door carrying something, and her mother behind her caught her by the back of her dress and slapped her hands. Don't you put that stuff in your mouth, the mother screamed, and the little girl dropped a handful of Constance's spice cookies. Mary Cat, said Constance, would you like a cup of tea? Mary Cat, said Constance, would you like to go to sleep? Oh no, said Mary Cat, you will poison me. We had to get down the steps and into the woods to be safe. It was not far, but the headlights of the car shone across the lawn. I wondered if Constance would slip and fall, running through the light. But we had to get to the woods, and there was no other way. We hesitated near the steps, neither one of us quite daring to go any further, but the windows were broken, and inside they were throwing our dishes and our glasses and our silverware and even the pots Constance used in cooking. I wondered if my stool in the corner of the kitchen had been smashed yet. While we stood still for the last minute, a car came up the driveway and another behind it. They swung to a stop in front of the house, sending more light onto the lawn. What the holy devil is going on here? Jim Clark said, rolling out of the first car, and Helen Clark on the other side opened her mouth and stared, shouting and punishing and pushing and not seeing us at all. Jim Clark made his way through our door into our house. What the holy goddamn devil is going on here? He kept saying, and outside Helen Clark never saw us, but only stared at our house. Crazy fools, Jim Clark yelled inside. Crazy, drunken fools. Dr. Levy came out of the second car and hurried toward the house. Has everyone gone crazy here? Jim Clark was saying from inside. And there was a shout of laughter. Would you like a cup of tea? Someone inside screamed and they laughed. Ought to bring it down brick by brick, someone said inside. The doctor came up the steps running and pushed us aside without looking. Where is Julian Blackwood? He asked a woman in the doorway, and the woman said, down the boneyard, 10 feet deep. It was time. I took Constance tightly by the hand, and we started carefully down the steps. I would not run yet because I was afraid that Constance might fall, so I brought her slowly down the steps. No one could see us yet except Helen Clark, and she stared at the house. Behind us, I heard Jim Clark shouting. He was trying to make people leave our house, and before we reached the bottom step, there were voices behind us. There they are, someone shouted, and I think it was Stella. There they are, there they are, there they are. And I started to run, but Constance stumbled, and then they were all around us, pushing and laughing and trying to get close to see. Constance held Uncle Julian's shawl around her face so they could not look at her. And for a minute, we stood very still, pressed together by the feeling of people all around us. Put them back in the house and start the fire all over again. We fixed things up nice for you girls, just like you always wanted. Mary Cat and Constance, would you like a cup of tea? For one terrible minute, I thought they were going to join hands and dance around us, singing. I saw Helen Clark, far away, pressed hard against the side of the car. She was crying and saying something, and even though I could not hear her through the noise, I knew she was saying, I want to go home, please. I want to go home. Mary Cat and Constance, would you like to go to sleep? They were trying not to touch us. Whenever I turned, they fell back a little. Once between two shoulders, I saw Harler of the junkyard wandering across the porch of our house, picking up things and setting them to one side in a pile. I moved a little, holding Constance's hand tight, and as they fell back, we ran suddenly, going toward the trees. But Jim Donnell's wife and Mrs. Mueller came in front of us, laughing and holding out their arms. We stopped. I turned and gave Constance a little pull, and we ran. But Stella and Harris boys crossed in front of us, laughing, and the Harris boys shouting, "Down in the boneyard, 10 feet deep." And we stopped. Then I turned toward the house, running again, with Constance pulling behind me, and Albert, the grocer, and his greedy wife were there, holding their hands to halt us, almost dancing together. We were stopped. I went then to the side, and Jim Donnell stepped in front of us, and we stopped. "Oh, no, Merricat, you'll poison me," Jim Donnell said politely, and they came around us again, circling and keeping carefully out of reach. "Merricat and Constance, would you like to go to sleep?" Over it all was the laughter, almost drowning the singing and the shouting and the howling of the Harris boys. "Merricat and Constance, would you like a cup of tea?" Constance held to me with one hand, and with the other hand she kept Uncle Julian's shawl across her face. I saw an opening in the circle around us and ran again for the trees, but all the Harris boys were there, one on the ground with laughter, and we stopped. I turned again and ran for the house, but Stella came forward, and we stopped. Constance was stumbling, and I wondered if we were going to fall onto the ground in front of them, lying there where they might step on us in their dancing, and I stood still. I could not possibly let Constance fall in front of them. "That's all now," Jim Clark said from the porch. His voice was not loud, but they all heard. "That's enough," he said. There was a small, polite silence, and then someone said, "Down in the boneyard, 10 feet deep," and the laughter rose. "Listen to me," Jim Clark said, raising his voice. "Listen to me. Julian Blackwood is dead." Then they were quiet at last. After a minute, Charles Blackwood said from the crowd around us, "Did she kill him?" They went back from us, moving slowly in small steps, withdrawing until there was a wide, clear space around us, and Constance standing clearly with Uncle Julian's shawl across her face. "Did she kill him?" Charles Blackwood asked again. "No, she did not," said the doctor, standing in the doorway of our house. "Julian died, as I have always known he would. He has been waiting a long time. Now go quietly," Jim Clark said. He began to take people by the shoulders, pushing a little at their backs, turning them toward their cars and the driveway. "Go quickly," he said. "There has been a death in this house." It was so quiet, in spite of the many people moving across the grass and going away, that I heard Helen Clark say, "Oh, poor Julian." I took a cautious step forward in the darkness, pulling Constance a little so that she followed me. "Heart," said the doctor on the porch, and I went another step. No one turned to look at us. Car doors slammed softly and motors started. I looked back once. A little group was standing around the doctor on the steps. Most of the lights were turned away. Heading down the driveway, when I left the shadows of the trees fall upon us, I moved quickly, one last step, and we were inside, pulling Constance. I hurried under the trees. In the darkness, when I felt my feet leave the grass of the lawn and touch the soft, mossy ground of the path through the woods, and knew that the trees had closed in around us, I stopped and put my arms around Constance. "It's all over," I told her, and held her tight. "It's all right," I said. "It's all right now." I knew my way in the darkness or in the light. I thought once how good it was that I had straightened my hiding place and freshened it so it would now be pleasant for Constance. I would cover her with leaves, like children in a story, and keep her safe and warm. Perhaps I would sing to her or tell her stories. I would bring her bright fruits and berries and water in a leaf cup. Some day we would go to the moon. I found the entrance to my hiding place and led Constance to in and look. Sorry. and led Constance in and took her to the corner where there was a fresh pile of leaves and a blanket. I pushed her gently until she sat down, and I took Uncle Julian's shawl away from her and covered her with it. A little purr came from the corner, and I knew that Jonas had been waiting here for me. I put branches across the entrance. Even if they came with lights, they would not see us. It was not entirely dark. I could see the shadow was Constance, and when I put my head back, I saw 2 or 3 stars shining from the far away between the leaves and the branches and down onto my head. One of our mother's Dresden figurines is broken, I thought, and I said aloud to Constance, I'm going to put to death in all their food and watch them die. Constance stirred, and the leaves rustled. The way you did before? She asked. It had never been spoken of between us, not once in 6 years. Yes, I said after a minute. The way I did before. Chapter 9. Sometime during the night, an ambulance came and took Uncle Julian away, and I wondered if they missed his shawl, which was wound around Constance as she slept. I saw the ambulance lights turning out into the driveway with a small red light on top, and I heard the distant sounds of Uncle Julian's leaving, the voices speaking gently because they were in the presence of the dead, and the doors opening and closing. They called to us 2 or 3 times, perhaps to ask if they might have Uncle Julian, but their voices were subdued, and no one came into the woods. I sat by the creek, wishing that I had been kinder to Uncle Julian. Uncle Julian had believed I was dead, and now he was dead himself. Bow your heads to our beloved Mary Catherine, I thought. You will be dead. The water moved steeply in the darkness, and I wondered what kind of a house we would have now. Perhaps the fire had destroyed everything, and we could go back tomorrow and find that the past 6 years had been burned, and they were waiting for us, sitting around the dining room table, waiting for Constance to bring them their dinner. Perhaps we would find ourselves in the Rochester house, or living in the village, or on a houseboat on the river, or in a tower on top of a hill. Perhaps the fire might be persuaded to reverse itself and abandon our house and destroy the village instead. Perhaps the villagers were all dead now. Perhaps the village was really a great game board, with their squares neatly marked out, and I had been moved past the square which read Fire, Return to Start, and was now on the last few squares, with only one move to go to reach home. Jonas's fur smelled of smoke. Today was Helen Clark's day to come to tea, but there would be no tea today because we'd have to neaten the house, although it was not the unusual day for neatening the house. I wished that Constance had made sandwiches for us to bring down to the creek, and I wondered if Helen Clark would try to come to tea even though the house was not ready. I decided that far from now on, I would not be allowed to hand teacups. When it first began to get light, I heard Constance stirring on the leaves, and I went into my hiding place to be near when she awakened. When she opened her eyes, she looked first at the trees above her, and then at me, and smiled. We are on the moon at last, I told her, and she smiled. I thought I dreamt it all, she said. No, it really happened, I said. Poor Uncle Julian. They came in the night and took him away, and we stayed here on the moon. I'm glad to be here, she said. Thank you for bringing me. There were leaves in her hair and dirt on her face, and Jonas, who had followed me into the hiding place, stared at her in surprise. He had never seen Constance with dirty face before. For a minute, she was quiet, no longer smiling, looking back at Jonas, realizing that she was dirty. And then she said, Maricat, what are we going to do? First, we must neaten our house, even though it's not the usual day. The house, she said. Oh, Maricat. I had no dinner last night, I told her. Oh, Maricat. She sat up and untangled herself quickly from Uncle Julian's shawl and the leaves. 1 second. Oh, Maricat. Poor baby, she said. We'll hurry. And she scrambled to her feet. First, you'd better go wash your face. She went to the creek and wet her handkerchief and scrubbed at her face while I shook out Uncle Julian's shawl and folded it, thinking how strange and backward everything was in this morning. I had never touched Uncle Julian's shawl before. I already saw that the rules were going to be different, but it was odd to be folding Uncle Julian's shawl. Later, I thought I would come back here to my hiding place and clean it and put in fresh leaves. Mary Cat, you'll starve. We have to watch, I said, taking her hand to slow her. We have to go very quietly and carefully. Some of them may still be waiting around. I went first down the path, walking silently with Constance and Jonas behind me. Constance could not step as silently as I could, but she made very little sound, and of course Jonas made no sound at all. I took the path that would bring us out of the woods at the back of the house near the vegetable garden, and when I came to the edge of the woods, I stopped and held Constance back while we looked carefully to see if there are any of them left. For one first minute, we saw only the garden and the kitchen door, looking just as always, and then Constance gasped and said, "Oh, Maricat," with a little moan, and I myself very still because the top of our house was gone. I remembered that I had stood looking at our house with love yesterday, and I thought how it had always been so tall, reaching up into the trees. Today, the house ended above the kitchen doorway in a nightmare of black and twisted wood. I saw part of a window frame still holding broken glass, and I thought that it was my window. I looked out that window from my room. There was no one there, and no sound. We moved together very slowly toward the house, trying to understand its ugliness and ruin and shame. I saw that ash had drifted among the vegetable plants, and lettuce would have to be washed before I could eat it. And the tomatoes. No fire had come this way, but everything, the grass, the apple trees, the marble bench in Constance's gardens, had an air of smokiness, and everything was dirty. As we came closer to the house, we saw more clearly that the house had not reached the ground, but the fire had not reached the ground, but had to be content with the bedrooms and the attic. Constance hesitated at the kitchen door, but she had opened it 1,000 times before, and it ought surely to recognize the touch of her hand. So she took the latch and lifted it. The house seemed to shiver when she opened the door, although one more draught could hardly chill it now. Constance had to push at the door to make it open, but no burned timber crashed down, and there was not, as I half thought there might be, a sudden rushing of falling altogether, as a house seemingly solid but really made only of ash might dissolve at a touch. "Oh, my kitchen," Constance said. "My kitchen." She stood in the doorway, looking. I thought that we had somehow not found our way back correctly through the night, that we had somehow lost ourselves and come back through the wrong gap in time, or uh, the wrong door, or the wrong fairy tale. Constance put her hand against the door frame to steady herself and said again, "Oh, my kitchen, Maricat." "My stool is still here," I said. The obstacle which made the door hard to open was the kitchen table turned on its side. I set it upright, and we went inside. Two of the chairs had been smashed, and on the floor was horrible with broken dishes and glasses and broken boxes of food and paper torn from the shelves, jars of jam and syrup and ketchup, and had all been shattered against the walls. The sink where Constance washed her vegetables and her dishes was filled with broken glass, as though glass was after glass had broken there methodically, one after another. Drawers of silverware and cookingware had been pulled out and broken against the table, and the walls and the silverware that had been in the house for generations of Blackwood wives was lying bent and scattered on the floor. Tablecloths, napkins, hemmed by Blackwood women, and washed and ironed again and again, mended and cherished, had been ripped from the dining room sideboard and dragged across the kitchen. It seemed that all the wealth and hidden treasure of our house had been found out and torn and soiled. I saw broken plates, which had come from the top shelves in the cupboard, and our little sugar bowl with roses lay almost at my feet, handles gone. Constance bent down and picked up a silver spoon. This was our grandmother's wedding pattern, she said, and set the spoon on the table. Then she said, "The preserves," and turned to the cellar door. It was closed, and I hoped that perhaps they had not seen it, or had perhaps not had the time to go down the stairs. Constance picked her way carefully across the floor and opened the cellar door and looked down. I thought of the jars and jars, so beautifully preserved, lying in broken, sticky heaps in the cellar. But Constance went down a step or two and said, "No, no, it's all right. Nothing here has been touched." She closed the cellar door again and made her way across the sink to wash her hands and dry them on the dish towel from the floor. "Now, first your breakfast," she said. Jonas sat on the doorstep in the growing sunlight, looking at the kitchen with astonishment. Once he raised his eyes to me, and I wondered if he thought that Constance and I had made this mess. I saw a cup not broken, and picked it up and set it on the table, and then thought to look for more things which might have escaped. I remembered that one of our mother's Dresden figurines had rolled safely onto the grass, and I wondered if it had been hidden successfully and preserved itself. I would look for it later. Nothing was orderly, nothing was planned. It was not like any other day. Once Constance went into the cellar and came back with her arms full. "Vegetable soup," she said, almost singing, "and strawberry jam, and chicken soup, and pickled beef." She set the jars on the kitchen table and turned slowly, looking at the floor. "There," she said at last, and went to a corner to pick up a small saucepan. Then, on a sudden thought, she set down the saucepan and made her way into the pantry. "Merricat," she called with laughter, "they didn't find the flour in the barrel, or the salt, or the potatoes." "They found the sugar," I thought. The floor was gritty and almost alive under my feet, and I thought, of course, they would go looking for sugar and have a lovely time. Perhaps they had thrown handfuls of sugar at one another, screaming, Blackwood sugar, want a taste?" "They got the pantry shelves," Constance went on, "the cereals and the spices and the canned foods." I walked slowly around the kitchen, looking at the floor. I thought that they had probably tumbled things by armload because cans of food were scattered and bent, and though they had been tossed into the air, and the boxes of cereal and tea and crackers had been trampled underfoot and broken open, the tins of spices were all together thrown into a corner unopened. I thought I could still smell the faint spicy scent of Constance's cookies, and then saw one of them crushed on the floor. Constance came out of the pantry carrying a loaf of bread. "Look what they didn't find," she said, "and there are eggs and milk and butter in the cooler." Since they had not found the cellar door, they had not found the cooler just inside, and I was pleased that they had not discovered eggs to mix into the mess on the floor. At one time, I found 3 unbroken chairs and set them where they belonged around the table. Jonas sat in my corner on my stool, watching us. I drank chicken soup from a cup without a handle, and Constance washed a knife to spread butter on the bread. Although I did not perceive it then, time and the orderly pattern of our days had ended. I do not know when I found the 3 chairs, and when I ate the buttered bread, whether I had found the chairs and then eaten the bread, or whether I had eaten first or then done both at once. Once Constance turned suddenly and put down her knife. She started for the closed door to Uncle Julian's room, and then turned back, smiling a little. I thought I heard him waking," she said, and then sat down again. We had not yet been out of the kitchen. We still did not know how much of the house was left to us, or what we might find waiting beyond the closed doors into the dining room and the hall. We sat quietly in the kitchen, grateful for the chairs and the chicken soup and the sunlight coming through the doorway, not yet ready to go further. "What will they do with Uncle Julian?" I asked. "They will have a funeral," Constance said, with sadness. "Do you remember the others?" I was in the orphanage. Well, they let me go to the funerals of the others. I can remember. They will have a funeral for Uncle Julian, and the Clarks will go, and the Carringtons, and certainly little Mrs. Wright. They will tell each other how sorry they are. They will look to see if we are there. I felt them looking to see if we were there, and I shivered. They will bury him with the others. I would like to bury something for Uncle Julian, I said. Constance was quiet, looking at her fingers, which lay still and long on the table. Uncle Julian is gone, and the others, she said. Most of our house is gone. Mary Cat, we are all that is left. Jonas, Jonas, we're going to lock ourselves in more securely than ever. But today is the day Helen Clark comes to tea. No, she said. Not again, not here. As long as we sat quietly together in the kitchen, it was possible to postpone seeing the rest of the house. The library books were still on the shelf, untouched, and I supposed that no one had wanted to touch the books belonging to the library. There was a fine, after all, for destroying library property. Constance, who was always dancing, seemed now unwilling to move. She sat at the kitchen table with her hands spread before her, not looking around at the destruction and almost dreaming, as though she never believed that she had wakened this morning at all. We mustn't eat in the house, I said to her uneasily, and she smiled across at me. When I felt that I could not wait for her any longer, I said, I'm going to look, and got up and went to the dining room door. She watched me, not moving. When I opened the door to the dining room, there was a shocking smell of wetness and burned wood and destruction, and glass from the tall windows lay across the floor, and the silver tea service had been swept off the sideboard and stamped into a grotesque, unrecognizable shape. Chairs were broken here too. I remembered that they had taken up chairs and hurled them at windows and walls. I went through the dining room and into the front hall. The front door stood wide open, and early sunlight lay in patterns along the floor of the hall, touching broken glass and cloth. After a minute, I recognized the cloth as the drawing room draperies which our mother had once had made up 14 feet long. No one was outside. I stood in the open doorway and saw that the lawn was marked with all the tires of the cars and the feet which had danced and where the hoses had gone. There were puddles of mud, and the front porch littered, and I remembered the neat pile of partly broken furniture which Harler, the junk dealer, had set together last night. I wondered if he planned to come today and with a truck and gather up everything he could, or if he would only put the pile together because he loved great piles of broken things and could not resist stacking junk whenever he found it. I waited in the doorway to be sure that no one was watching, and then I ran down the steps, across the grass, and found our mother's Dresden figurine, unbroken where it had hidden against the roots of the bush. I thought to take it to Constance. She was still sitting quietly at the kitchen table, and when I put the Dresden figurine down before her, she looked for a minute and then took it in her hands and held it against her cheek. It's all my fault, she said. Somehow it was all my fault. I love you, Constance, I said. And I love you, Maricat. And will you make a little cake for Jonas and me? Pink frosting with gold leaves around the edge? She shook her head, and for a minute I thought she was not going to answer me, and then she took a deep breath and stood up. First, she said, I'm going to clean this kitchen. What are you going to do with that? I asked her, touching the Dresden figurine with the very tip of my finger. Put it back where it belongs, she said, and I followed her as she opened the door into the hall and made her way down the hall to the drawing room doorway. The hall was less littered than the other rooms because there had been less in it to smash, but there were fragments carried from the kitchen, and we stepped on spoons and dishes which had been thrown here. I was shocked, when we came into the drawing room, to see our mother's portrait looking down on us so graciously while her drawing room lay destroyed around her. The white wedding cake trim was blackened with smoke and soot, and it would never be cleaned again. I disliked seeing the drawing room even more than the kitchen or the dining room because we had always kept it so tidy. And our mother had loved this room. I wondered which of them had pushed over Constance's harp, and I remembered that I had heard it cry out as it fell. The rose brocade of the chairs was torn and dirty, smudged with marks of wet feet that had kicked the chairs and stamped on the sofa. The windows were broken here too, and with the drapes torn down, we were clearly visible from the outside. I think I can close the shutters, I said, as Constance hesitated in the doorway. Unwilling to come further into the room, I stepped out onto the porch through the broken window, thinking that no one had ever come this way before, and found that I could unhook the shutters easily. The shutters were as tall as the windows. Originally, it was intended that a man with a ladder would close the shutters when the summers had ended and the family went away to a city. But so many years had passed since the shutters were closed that the hooks had rusted, and I neglected only to shake the heavy shutters to pull the hooks away from the house. I swung the shutters closed, but I could only reach the lower bolt to hold them. There were two more bolts high above my head. Perhaps some night I might come out here with a ladder, but the lower bolt would have to hold them for now. After I had closed the shutters on both the tall drawing room windows, I went along the porch and in, formally and informally through the front door and into the drawing room, where Constance stood in dimness now. Without the sunlight, Constance went to the mantel and set the Dresden figurine in its rightful place, below the portrait of our mother, and for one quick minute, the great shadowy room came back together again, as it should be, and then fell apart forever. We had to walk carefully because of the broken things on the floor. Our father's safe lay just inside the drawing room door, and I laughed, and even Constance smiled because it had not been opened, and it had clearly not been possible to carry it any further than this. Foolishness, Constance said, and touched the safe with her toe. Our mother had always been pleased when people admired her drawing room, but now no one would come to the windows and look in, and no one would ever see it again. Constance and I closed the drawing room door behind us and never opened it afterwards. Constance waited just inside the front door while I went onto the porch again and closed the shutters over the tall dining room windows. And then I came inside and we shut and locked the front door, and we were safe. The hall was dark with two narrow lines of sunlight coming through the two narrow glass panels set on either side of the door. We could look outside through the glass, but no one could see in, even by putting their eyes up close, because the hall inside was dark. Above us, the stairs were black and led into blackness or burned rooms with incredibly tiny spots of sky showing through. Until now, the roof had always hidden us from the sky, but I did not think that there was any way we could be vulnerable from above, and closed my mind against the thought of silent winged creatures coming out of the trees above to perch on broken, burnt rafters of our house, peering down. I thought it might be wise to barricade the stairs by putting something, a broken chair perhaps, across. A mattress soaked and dirty lay halfway down the stairs, and this was where they had stood with the hoses and fought the fire back and out. I stood at the foot of the stairs, looking up, wondering where our house had gone. The walls and the floors and the beds and the boxes of things in the attic. Our father's watch was burned away, and our mother's tortoise shell dressing set. I could feel a breath of air on my cheek. It came from the sky. I could see, but it smelled of smoke and ruin. Our house was a castle, turreted and the open to the sky. Come back to the kitchen, Constance said. I can't stay out here. Like children hunting for shells, two old ladies going through dead leaves looking for pennies. We shuffled along the kitchen floor with our feet, turning over broken trash to find things which were still whole and useful. When we had been along and across the diagonally through the kitchen, we had gathered together a little pile of practical things on the kitchen table, and there was quite enough for the two of us. There were 2 cups with handles, and several without, and a half-dozen plates, and 3 bowls. We had been able to rescue all of the cans of food undamaged, and the cans of spice went neatly back onto their shelf. We found most of the silverware had straightened most of it as well, as we could put it back into its proper drawers. Since every Blackwood bride had brought her own silverware and china and linen into the house, we had always had dozens of butter knives and soup ladles and cake servers. Our mother's best silverware had been in tarnish-proof box on the dining room sideboard, but they had found it and scattered it on the floor. One of our cups was green with pale yellow inside, and Constance said that one could be mine. I never saw anyone use it before, she said. I suppose a grandmother or a great-great-aunt brought that set to the house as her wedding china. There once were plates to match. The cup which Constance chose was white with orange flowers, and one with the cup which Constance chose was white with orange flowers, and one of the plates matched that. I remember when we used those dishes, Constance said. They were the everyday china when I was very small. The china we used for best then was white with gold edges. Then Mother brought new best china, and the white gold china was used for every day, and these flower dishes went into the pantry shelf with the other half-broken sets. These last few years, I've always used Mother's everyday china except when Helen Clark came to tea. We will take our meals like ladies, she said, using cups with handles. When we had taken out everything we wanted and could use, Constance got a heavy broom and swept all the rubble into the dining room. Now we won't have to look at it, she said. She swept the hall clear so we could go from the kitchen to the front door without passing through the dining room. And then we closed all the doors to the dining room and never opened them again. I thought of the Dresden figurine standing small and courageous under our mother's portrait in the dark drawing room, and I remembered that we would never dust it again. Before Constance swept away the torn cloth that had been the drawing room drapes, I asked her to cut me off a piece of the cord which had once drawn them open and shut, and she cut me a piece with a gold tassel on the end. I wondered if it might be the right thing to bury it for Uncle Julian, whom when we had finished and Constance had scrabbled the kitchen floor. I'm sorry, it's late, and when we had finished and Constance had scrubbed the kitchen floor, our house looked clean and new. From the front door to the kitchen door, everything was clear and swept. So many things were gone from the kitchen that it looked bare, but Constance put our cups and plates and bowls on the shelf and found a pan to give Jonas milk, and we were quite safe. The front door was locked, and the kitchen door was locked and bolted, and we were sitting in the kitchen table drinking milk from our 2 cups, and Jonas was drinking from his pan when a knocking started on the front door. Constance ran to the cellar, and I stopped just long enough to be sure that the kitchen door was bolted, and then followed her. We sat on the cellar stairs in the darkness and listened far away. At the front door, the knocking went on, and then a voice called, "Constance? Mary Catherine? Constance, it's Helen Clark. Do you think she's come for tea?" No, never again. As we had both known she would, she came around the house calling us. When she knocked on the kitchen door, we held our breath, neither of us moving, because the top half of the kitchen door was glass, and we knew that she could see in, but we were safely in the cellar stairs, and she could not open the door. "Constance? Mary Catherine? Are you in there?" She shook the door handle, as people do when they want a door to open and think to catch it unaware and slip in before the lock can hold. "Jim," she said, I know they're in there. I can see something cooking on the stove. You've got to open that door, Jim, she said, raising her voice. Constance, Constance, come and talk to me. I want to see you. Jim, she said, they're in there. They can hear me. I know it. I'm sure they can hear you, Jim Clark said. They can probably hear you in the village. But I'm sure they misunderstood the people last night. I'm sure Constance was upset, and I must tell them that nobody meant any harm. Constance, just listen to me, please. We want you and Mary Catherine to come to our house until we can decide what to do with you. Everything's all right, really it is. We're going to forget all about this. Do you think she'll push the house over? I whispered to Constance, and Constance shook her head wordlessly. Jim, do you think you could break this door down? Certainly not. Leave them alone, Helen. They'll come out when they're ready. But Constance takes these things so seriously. I'm sure she's frightened now. Leave them alone. They cannot be left alone. That is absolutely the worst possible thing for them. I want them out of there and at home with me where I can take care of them. They don't seem to want to come, Jim Clark said. Constance, Constance, now I know you're in there. Come on and open that door. I was thinking that we might very well put a cloth or a piece of cardboard over the window in the kitchen door. It simply would not do to have Helen Clark constantly peering in to watch pots cooking on the stove. We could pin the curtains together across the kitchen windows, and perhaps the windows were all covered. We could sit quietly at the table when Helen Clark came pounding outside and not have to hide on the cellar stairs. Let's leave, Jim Clark said. They're not going to answer you. But I want to take them home with me. We did what we could do. We'll come back another time when they'll feel more like seeing you. Oh, Constance, Constance, please answer me. Constance sighed and tapped her fingers irritably and almost noiselessly on the stair rail. I sure wish she'd hurry, she said into my ear. My soup is going to boil over. Helen Clark called again and again, going back around the house to their car, calling Constance, Constance, as though we might be somewhere in the wood, up a tree perhaps, or under the lettuce leaves, or waiting to spring out at her from behind a bush. When we heard the car start distantly, we came up out of the cellar, and Constance turned off her soup and went along the hall to the front door to be sure they had gone. And the door was safely locked. I saw their car turn out the driveway and thought I could still hear Helen Clark calling, Constance, Constance. She certainly wanted her tea, I said to Constance when I came back to the kitchen. We have only 2 cups with handles, Constance said. She will never take tea here again. It's a good thing Uncle Julian's gone, or one of us would have to use a broken cup. Are you going to neaten Uncle Julian's room? Maricat, Constance turned from the stove to look at me. What are we going to do? Well, we've neatened the house. We've had food. We've hidden from Helen Clark. What are we going to do? Where are we going to sleep? How are we going to know what time it is? What will we wear for clothes? Well, why do we need to know what time it is? Our food won't last forever, even the preserves. We can sleep in my hiding place by the creek. No, that's all right for hiding, but you must have a real bed. I saw a mattress on the stairs from my own old bed. Perhaps we can pull it down and clean it and dry it in the sun. One corner is burned. Good, said Constance. We went together to the stairs and took hold of the mattress awkwardly. It was unpleasantly wet and dirty. We dragged it, pulling together along the hall with little scraps of wood and glass coming with it, and got it across Constance's clean kitchen floor to the kitchen door before unlocking the door, and I looked out carefully. And even when the door was open, I went out first to look around in every direction, but it was safe. We dragged the mattress out onto the lawn and put it in the sun near our mother's marble bench. Uncle Julian used to sit right here, I said. It'd be a good day today for Uncle Julian to sit right here in the sun. I hope he was warm when he died. Perhaps he remembered the sun for a minute. I had a shawl. Oh, I hope he didn't wish for it, Merricat. I'm going to plant something right here where he used to sit. I'm going to bury something for him. What'll you plant? A flower? Constance leaned and touched the grass softly. Some kind of yellow flower. It's going to look funny, right in the middle of the lawn. We'll know why it's there, and no one else will ever see it, and I will bury something yellow to keep Uncle Julian warm. First, however, my lazy Merricat, you will get a pot of water and scrub that mattress clean, and I will wash the kitchen floor again. We were going to be very happy, I thought. There were a great many things to do, and a whole new pattern of days to be arranged. But I thought we were going to be very happy. Constance was pale and still saddened by what they had done to her kitchen, and she had scrubbed every shelf and washed the table again and washed the windows and the floor. Our dishes were bravely on their shelf, and their cans of unbroken boxes of food we had rescued from the substantial row in the pantry. I could train Jonas to bring back rabbits for stew, I told her, and she laughed, and Jonas looked back at her blandly. The cat is so used to living on cream and rum cakes and buttered eggs that I doubt if he could catch a grasshopper, she said. I don't think I could care for grasshopper stew. At any rate, right now I am making an onion pie. While Constance washed the kitchen, I found a heavy cardboard carton, which I took apart carefully, and had several large pieces of cut cardboard to cover the glass window in the kitchen door. The hammer and nails were in the tool shed, where Charles Blackwood had put them after trying to mend the broken step, and I nailed cardboard across the kitchen door until the glass was completely covered and no one could see in. I nailed more cardboard across the two kitchen windows, and the kitchen was dark, but safe. It would be safer to let the kitchen windows get dirty, I told Constance. But she was shocked, and I said I wouldn't live in a dirty house with dirty windows. And said I wouldn't live in a house with dirty windows. When we had finished, the kitchen was very clean, but could not sparkle because there was so little light, and I knew that Constance was not pleased. She loved sunshine and brightness and cooking in light, lovely kitchen. We can keep the door open, I said, if we watch carefully all the time. We'll hear if any cars stop in front of the house when I can, I said. I will try to think of a way to build barricades along the sides of the house so no one will be able to come around here to the back. Oh, I'm sure Helen Clark will try again. At any rate, she cannot come look in now. The afternoon was drawing in. Even the door, open to the sunlight, came only a short way across the floor, and Jonas came to Constance at the stove, asking for his supper. The kitchen was warm and comfortable and familiar and clean. It would be nice to have a fireplace in here, I thought. We could sit beside the fire, and then I thought, no, we've already had a fire. I will go and make sure that the front door is locked, I said. The front door was locked, and no one was outside. When I came back into the kitchen, Constance said, tomorrow I will clean Uncle Julian's room. We have so little house left that it should be very clean. Will you sleep in there, in Uncle Julian's bed? No, Merricat. I want you to sleep in there. It's the only bed that we have. Oh, no, I'm not allowed in Uncle Julian's room. She was quiet for a minute, looking at me curiously, and then asked, even though Uncle Julian's gone, Merricat? Besides, I found the mattress and cleaned it, and it came from my bed, and I want it on the floor in my corner. Silly Merricat. Anyway, I'm afraid we'll both have the floor for tonight. The mattress will not be dry before tomorrow, and Uncle Julian's bed is not clean. I can bring branches from my hiding place and the leaves on my clean kitchen floor. I'll get the blanket through, though, and Uncle Julian's shawl. You're going out now? All that way? No one's outside, I said. It's almost dark, and I can go very safely. If anyone comes, close the door and lock it. If I see the door is closed, I will wait by the creek until I can come home safely, and I will take Jonas for my protection. I ran all the way to the creek. But Jonas was faster and waiting for me when I got to my hiding place. It was good to run and good to come back again to our house and see the kitchen door standing open and the warm light inside when Jonas and I came in. I shut the door and bolted it, and we were ready for the night. It's a good dinner, Constance said, warm and happy from cooking. Come and sit down, Maricat. With the door shut, she had to turn on the ceiling light, and our dishes on the table were neatly set. Tomorrow I will try to polish the silverware, she said, and we must bring in things from the garden, the lettuces full of ashes. Tomorrow, too, Constance said, looking at the black squares of cardboard which covered the windows. I'm going to try to think of some kind of curtain to hide your cardboard. Tomorrow I will barricade the sides of the house. Tomorrow Jonas will catch us a rabbit. Tomorrow I will guess for you what time it is. Far away in the front of the house, a car stopped, and we were silent, looking at one another, for I thought now we will know we are safe. And I got up and made sure that the kitchen door was bolted. I could not see out through the cardboard, and I was sure that they could not see in. And knocking started at the front door, but there was no time to make sure that the front door was locked. They knocked only for a moment, as though certain that we would not be at the front of the house. And then we heard them stumbling in the darkness as they tried to find their way around to the side of the house, to the back. I heard Jim Clark's voice say, and another, which I remembered, was the voice of Dr. Levy. Can't see a thing, Jim Clark said. Black as sin out here. There's a crack of light at one of the windows. Which one, I wondered? Which window still showed a crack? They're in there all right, Jim Clark said. No place else could be. I just want to know if they're hurt or sick. Don't like to think of them shut up and in there needing help. I'm supposed to be bringing them home with me, Jim Clark said. They came to the back door. The voices were directly outside, and Constance reached out her hand across the table to me. If it seemed that they might be able to look in, we could run together for the cellar. Damn place is all boarded up, Jim Clark said, and I thought, good. Oh, that's good. I had forgotten that there would be real boards and tool shed. I never thought anything but cardboard, which is much too weak. Miss Blackwood, the doctor called, and one of them knocked on the door. Miss Blackwood, it's Dr. Levy. And Jim Clark, Helen's husband? Helen's very worried about you. Are you hurt? Are you sick? Do you need help? Helen wants you to come to our house. She's waiting there for you. Listen, the doctor said, and I thought he had his face up very close to the glass, almost touching it. He talked in a very friendly voice and quietly. Now listen, no one's going to hurt you. We're your friends. We came all this way over here to help you and make sure that you were all right, and we don't want to bother you. As a matter of fact, we promise not to bother you at all, ever again, if you'll just once say that you're well and safe, just one word. You can't just let people go on worrying and worrying about you, Jim Clark said. Just one word, the doctor said. All you have to say is you're all right. They waited. I could feel them pressing their faces close to the glass, longing to see inside. Constance looked at me across the table and smiled a little, and I smiled back. Our safeguards were good, and they could not see in. Listen, the doctor said, and he raised his voice a little. Listen, Julian's funeral is tomorrow. We thought you'd want to know. There are a lot of flowers already, Jim Clark said. You'd be really pleased to see all the flowers. We sent flowers, and the Wrights and the Carringtons. I think you'd feel a little different about your friends if you could see all the flowers we all sent Julian. I wondered why they would feel different if we saw the flowers, Uncle Julian's flowers. Certainly Uncle Julian, buried in flowers, swarmed over by flowers, would not resemble the Uncle Julian we had seen every day. Perhaps masses of flowers would warm Uncle Julian dead. I tried to think of Uncle Julian dead and could only remember him asleep. I thought of the Clarks and the Carringtons and the Wrights pouring armfuls of flowers down onto poor Uncle Julian, helplessly dead. You're not gaining anything by driving away your friends, you know. Helen said to tell you. Listen, I could feel them pushing against the door. No one's going to bother you. Just tell us you're all right. We're not going to keep coming, you know. There's a limit to how much friends can take. Jonas yawned. In silence, Constance turned slowly and carefully back to the face her place at the table and took up a buttered biscuit and took a tiny silent bite. I wanted to laugh, and I put my hands over my mouth. Constance eating a biscuit silently was funny, like a doll pretending to eat. Damn it, Jim Clark said. He knocked at the door. Damn it, he said. For the last time, the doctor said, we know you're in there. For the last time, will you just... Oh, come away, Jim Clark said. It's not worth the yelling. Listen, the doctor said, and I thought he had his mouth against the door. One of these days you're going to need help. You'll be sick or hurt. You'll need help. Then you'll be quick enough to... Leave them be, Jim Clark said. Come on. I heard the footsteps going around the side of the house and wondered if they were tricking us, pretending to walk away, then coming silently back to stand without sound outside the door, waiting. I thought of Constance silently eating a biscuit inside and Jim Clark silently listening outside, and a little cold chill went up my back. Perhaps there would never be a noise in the world again. Then the car started at the front of the house, and we heard it drive away, and Constance put her fork down on her plate with a little crash, and I breathed again and said, Where have they got Uncle Julian, do you suppose? At the same place, Constance said absently. In the city, Mary Cat, she said, looking up suddenly. Yes, Constance? I want to say, I'm sorry. I was wicked last night. I was still cold and looking at her and remembering. I was very wicked, she said. I never should have reminded you of why they all died. Then don't remind me now. I could not move my hand over to reach to take hers. I wanted you to forget about it. I never wanted you to speak about it, ever, and I'm sorry I did. I put the sugar. I know. I knew then. You never used sugar. No. So I put it in the sugar. Constance sighed. Maricat, she said, we'll never talk about it ever again. Never. I was chilled, but she smiled at me kindly, and it was all right. I love you, Constance, I said. And I love you, my Maricat. Jonas sat on the floor and slept on the floor, and I thought it ought to be so difficult for me. Constance should have had leaves and soft moss under her blanket, but we could not for the dirty floor. We could not dirty the kitchen floor again. I put my blanket in the corner near my stool because it was the place I knew best, and Jonas got up onto the stool and sat there looking down on me. Constance lay on the floor near the stove. It was dark, but I could see the paleness of her face across the kitchen. Are you comfortable? I asked her, and she laughed. I've spent a lot of time in this kitchen, she said, but I never before tried lying on its floor. I've taken such good care of it. It has to make me welcome, I think. Tomorrow we bring in the lettuce. There is one more chapter, but I think we will read this tomorrow night because, again, we are Scared and Alone is not tomorrow. We normally would, but there was a storm warning, so we won't have that tomorrow. So I'll read this book, and I will start another book tomorrow. I hope you're enjoying it. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Again, thank you for all the likes, the comments, the shares. That does really help me out. So that is a great way of supporting the channel. Other great ways of supporting the channel, of course, are monetary. If you would like, you can join me over on patreon.com/thegentlemanpsychic. And there's also my PayPal account. Anything that you can do, if you can do it, it'd be great. If you can't, that's fine. I appreciate you. I adore you. I am so grateful that you are here. With that, my beauties, I bid you good night.